call the committee to order of the Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry Committee. We first want to welcome the witnesses we will be hearing from, Deputy Undersecretary Montano Green, Mr. Pittman, and Dr. Ortega. We thank you all for being here today, and we, of course, in a few minutes will hear from our colleagues who have been playing leadership roles on this issue who are not on the committee, and then as we move through today, we will, of course, hear from colleagues on the committee who have important legislation as well. Agriculture is crucial to our American way of life. That's what we know. And I always say that we don't have an economy unless somebody makes something and somebody grows something. That's how we have an economy in the United States. Our food industry and agriculture support more than 21 million jobs, contributing roughly $1.2 trillion to the American economy and providing a safe and affordable food supply. Also, we know food security is national security. That's the message I shared in 2013 when I held a hearing in this committee to review the purchase of Smithfield Foods by a Chinese company. It was the largest purchase of a U.S. company and the first purchase of a major U.S. food and agriculture company by a Chinese firm. After that hearing, I worked with Senator Grassley to introduce the Food Security as National Security Act to help ensure that acquisitions of U.S. food and agriculture companies receive proper scrutiny. It gives USDA and FDA officials permanent representation on the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, and we will certainly hear more about CFIUS today. And it adds new criteria to consider impacts to the U.S. food systems. Since that time, other major U.S. food and agriculture companies have been bought by foreign companies. American farmers and families have raised many questions, from the economic impacts of foreign purchases in our food supply chain to how we can protect agriculture innovation and research spurred by U.S. investment and more. The American people deserve careful consideration of how foreign investment will affect the future of our farms, ranches, and agricultural economy. Today, we are having a conversation and a fact-finding session about foreign investment in U.S. agricultural land. This discussion is not new. Then Congressman Grassley, and I see he's not here yet, so please let him know I gave him several shout-outs today, Senator Ernst. But Congressman Grassley helped author the Agriculture Foreign Investment Disclosure Act of 1978 in an attempt to understand the full picture of foreign ownership of U.S. farmland. That was nearly 5 decades ago. Thanks to the database established under that law, we know that foreign investors today hold an interest in nearly 40 million acres of American farm and forest land, which represents just over 3% of all privately held agricultural land in the U.S. While this is a small fraction of overall agricultural land, foreign ownership has increased 66% since 2010, nearly 2 million acres per year. The largest foreign stakeholders in American farmland remain countries like Canada, the United Kingdom, and those in Europe, while Chinese ownership is less than 1% of all foreign-held farmland up to this point. We have heard some real concerns about foreign ownership and that it may be undercounted and that the American government lacks the proper oversight tools to see the whole picture. It's also important to consider what impacts foreign investment can have on U.S. farmers and consumers. I was pleased to partner with Senator Ernst to introduce a bipartisan bill earlier this year, the Farmland Act, which is aimed at improving the reporting process and providing new resources for USDA, and a number of other members as well have introduced important bills on this topic. In July, the Senate adopted an amendment on this issue authored by Senators Tester and Rounds to the National Defense Authorization Act. I'm glad that the idea of adding USDA to CFIUS that Senator Grassley and I first proposed was included in this amendment. The leadership of Senators Tester and Rounds on these issues has been critical. We're glad to hear from them today, and also glad to hear from 2 other leaders, not on our committee, Senator Baldwin and Lankford, who will be sharing information as well. Our national security depends on a food system that is safe, secure, affordable, abundant, and resilient. As foreign entities continue their acquisitions of U.S. food and agricultural assets, American farmers and families deserve to know that these transactions receive proper scrutiny. We must also be cautious of our history of barring immigrants from owning land in our country and ensure efforts to protect our national and economic security interests do not encourage discrimination. To that end, I would like to submit for the record a letter from Congresswoman Judy Chu, the chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, that offers recommendations on how the committee can examine this issue without casting suspicion or discrimination towards Asian Americans. Without objection, I'll submit that for the record. Deputy Undersecretary Montano, Green, Director Pittman, Associate Professor Ortega, we look forward to hearing your insight on these matters. And now I turn to my partner on the committee, Ranking Member Bozeman, for any opening remarks that he would like to make.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for convening this hearing. We've traveled the country. We've held hearings in Washington, listening to farmers and ranchers discuss their priorities for the upcoming Farm Bill, and this topic has been brought to the committee's attention on numerous occasions. I've been asked many times for my thoughts on this matter, and my answer has always been that we need to better understand the problem before we can provide a solution. Today's hearing is a good first step in bringing more information to the discussion. My hope is at the end of today's hearing, we will have a clearer picture of the scope and the scale of the issues foreign ownership of U.S. farmland poses to our country. So thank you, Madam Chair, very much for working with us to get this hearing scheduled. Many of our Senate colleagues on and off the committee have given considerable thought to the issues of foreign land ownership. We will have the opportunity to hear from many of them this morning, and I look forward to hearing about what their states and are experiencing and how they believe we should address their concerns. As we move this discussion forward and consider various proposals, there are several considerations and questions that I would urge my colleagues to keep in mind. First, whatever we do must respect and protect the private property rights of U.S. citizens. Second, land use issues have historically been decided at the state and local levels. Are state laws sufficient to address the issues posed by foreign ownership? Does the federal government need to play a larger role? If the federal government does get more deeply involved, what are the impacts of increased regulation on asset values and liquidity that may hinder investment in agriculture in rural America? Finally, let's not forget that there are other parties aside from foreign operators that have made significant investments to acquire Americans' farmland, pasture land, and forests that are not the subject of this hearing. Yet these purchases also impact farmers and ranchers' ability to compete for land access, and they impact the nation's food and energy security. There's more work to be done, and I look forward to future efforts by this committee to explore the overall ownership of U.S. agricultural land and how it affects rural communities and economies across the country. In conclusion, I would like to join Senator Stabenow in welcoming four guests to the Agricultural Committee. Like several members on this committee, our esteemed colleagues, Senator Tester, Rounds, Baldwin, and Lankford, have each introduced thoughtful legislative proposals, and I'm grateful for their engagement. I look forward to working with each of you as we move forward, and thanks again, Madam Chair, for again working so that we could make this possible. I look forward to the discussion.
Well, thank you so much, and thanks for working closely on this hearing together. Senator Baldwin, we have four people, four senators we invited. I guess you're speaking for all of them, so we have the most powerful person here. Senator Baldwin from Wisconsin, as we know, our great colleague who's very involved in leadership in this, and we really appreciate your sharing your thoughts today.
Thank you, Chair Stabenow and Ranking Member Bozeman. Good morning to all the committee members. And thank you for convening this hearing on a very important issue of foreign ownership of U.S. farmland. In Wisconsin, the agriculture industry is a major economic driver, contributing more than $104 billion annually to our state's economy. The industry supports hundreds of thousands of jobs, especially in our rural communities, giving us the acclaimed name America's Dairyland. Our robust agriculture industry also helps keep our country safe, as food security is national security. But our foreign competitors realize this also. When foreign investors own American farmland and agricultural processing capacity, it can put our country and domestic food supply and local communities at risk. And right now, we don't know the full extent of the risk at hand. Outdated reporting systems and a lack of auditing at both a state and federal level leave us with incomplete information and many questions. That's why I appreciate the opportunity to highlight for the committee the alarming gap in comprehensive data on foreign ownership of agricultural land across the country. Senator Grassley has long led on this issue, and I was proud to work with him to introduce and pass our Farmland Security Act last Congress. This legislation that we were able to include in the omnibus last year. The Farmland Security Act of 2022 requires the Department of Agriculture to transition away from their outdated filing system to an online form and create a disaggregated public-facing database of filings and for supporting national security and food security research. Under our 2022 law, the USDA must also report to Congress on the impacts of foreign ownership of agricultural land on family farms, rural communities, and our domestic food supply. While passing our legislation was a step in the right direction, Congress can and must do more. And that's why I partnered once again with Senator Grassley to introduce the Farmland Security Act of 2023. Our new legislation would go even further in addressing foreign activity in our domestic agriculture marketplace. As this committee works to write the next farm bill, I urge you to include this bipartisan bill in the final version. The Farmland Security Act of 2023 would give USDA additional tools to address and penalize shell corporations who fail to comply with our nation's foreign ownership laws. It requires annual auditing of foreign ownership filings to ensure that we have the whole picture of our food security and or national security risks. This legislation also goes beyond looking just at ownership trends by scrutinizing the impacts of long-term leasing of agricultural land. And importantly, the Farmland Security Act of 2023 requires USDA to take a closer look into foreign ownership of our agricultural production capacity. Many of the products that our farmers make here are only as good as the processors that help them to get it to market. And we need to get a look under the hood of the entire supply chain in order to ensure that it is resilient and capable of preventing any malign foreign influence. We saw the increase in exports from U.S.-based foreign-owned meat processors during the COVID-19 pandemic, while those very same processors jacked up the prices of meat at the grocery store for American families. That market disruption illuminated the larger trend that we are not in total control of in our domestic agricultural supply chain. By understanding the full extent of foreign ownership in Americans' agriculture market, we can take the necessary steps to protect American consumers and safeguard both our food security and rural farming economies for generations to come. As lawmakers, we must ensure that we have access to information about foreign ownership of our food system, and this committee has the opportunity to do so in the next Farm Bill. I thank you again for having me here to testify.
Well, thank you, Senator Baldwin, for your longtime leadership on this. This is so important, and we appreciate your efforts and look forward to continuing to work with you. Senator Lankford, welcome. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to slip into the prestigious Ag Committee and to be able to have this kind of conversation and be able to walk through it. I'd love to be able to tell you a story of how I got involved in this at all. Obviously, I come from Oklahoma, which is a state with 4 million people. Literally, 2 million of them live in urban areas and 2 million of them live in rural areas. Like many of you as well, we have this great distribution in our state. So I've been interested in this in an ancillary way in many ways until 2018. In 2018, my state passed a medical marijuana law. Now, it was the most liberal medical marijuana bill in the nation at that time. And what we saw was a rush to be able to buy up farmland in our state. And it was a shift that surprised a lot of people in the state based on how quickly it happened and based on who actually did it. Oklahoma is now number 8 in the nation for having land owned by foreign entities in our state since 2018 when we passed that. In fact, the year after we passed a medical marijuana law in our state, the next year, Oklahoma had more land sales to foreign entities than any other state in the nation. We saw a rush that came into our state. We have great land prices. We have great prices for electricity and ready access to water. All those features all came together to have a huge amount of land that actually shifted into foreign ownership in the days literally leading after the passage of the medical marijuana law. Just in the past decade, to give you a percentage on this, we've had a 500% increase in our state of foreign ownership of land just in the past decade. We have 7,000 licensed marijuana grows in our state now. That's since 2018. In 2017, we had 0. Now we have 7,000. Thousands of those are actually illegal operations that haven't gone through the full licensing capability. Of those, about 75%, our Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics states about 75% of those are actually Chinese-owned facilities. What we have found is Chinese criminal organizations are partnering with Mexican cartels to be able to facilitate the distribution of marijuana nationwide, and they're using Oklahoma as the source for that. And this is all kicked in just since the 2018 vote. The problem in Oklahoma has gained a lot of national attention. Many of you have probably heard about it as well. Politico did a large feature article on it called "The Growing Chinese Investment in Illegal American Weed." Was their big article, and they did multiple different stories on it. But Oklahoma has been the epicenter on that. We've also seen things like in 2022, execution-style murders on a rural farm in Kingfisher, Oklahoma, where multiple people were left dead in an execution and a shooter on the run, all of them Chinese nationals, in rural Oklahoma. We have multiple entities that are in Oklahoma that are law enforcement, sheriff's department, and otherwise that are having a difficult time because if they pull someone over, they don't speak any English, they speak Mandarin, and it's become its own unique challenge. It has also led to a tremendous amount of human trafficking and sex trafficking to be able to work in these different farms across our state. We have seen over and over again individuals that have come across our southern border illegally that are Chinese nationals that end up in the marijuana farms, and they're working off their debt, literally being moved from farm to farm to farm. They literally don't even know what town that they're in or often what state that they're in when they're actually arrested and the operation is taken down. So that brought my attention to what was happening and got me to ask a simple question. If that's happening in Oklahoma, what is happening in the rest of the nation? And what are we seeing? And what I've seen is a tremendous rise in foreign ownership of land around our country. All of us that are in ag states all know the saying, there's lots of things you can get more of, there's not more land. So it's incredibly precious to us as Americans to be able to make sure we're making the right decisions on this. So we've worked for several years to be able to find a way to be able to deal with this foreign ownership of land issue, and we have something called the Soil Act. The Soil Act we brought up for several years and continue to be able to refine it, add additional ideas to it. My partners on this are Senators Bennett, Risch, and Tillis. We've worked together specifically on the ag issues here, and let me walk through the details of it. It requires review of agricultural real estate purchased by certain foreign entities through the CFIUS process, which we think is a reasonable place to be able to put that. It restricts federal assistance for foreign-held real estate holdings, and it broadens disclosure requirements for land purchases made by foreign entities through the AFIDA process. So for us, we're focused in on what are we doing to actually make this a better process. It does not do a blanket prohibition of foreign ownership of land, but it puts an additional hoop in the process so that illegal operations are not going to go through that hoop. If they've got to go through the CFIUS hoop and they can actually show that there's a reason they should have that land holding, they should be able to actually earn the right to be able to do that. We have foreign ownership across our nation from multiple entities. That's never been an issue for us as Americans, but we should actually ask the basic question, why? Before we're making agricultural land available to them. We attempt to be forward-looking in this as well by not citing one particular country or group of countries, but using the established list from the Department of Commerce and the Director of National Intelligence to saying as that list shifts from the Department of Commerce and the Director of National Intelligence, it would also shift in ours as well. We're narrowing in specifically on this committee's jurisdiction. The Soil Act closes current reporting loopholes currently in the AFIDA process by requiring reports of leases longer than 5 years and the disclosure regardless of acreages. The reason is that we have a lease loophole that's currently in the AFIDA process that if you don't own it but you lease it, you don't have to go through that reporting process. We're trying to be able to close that loophole. And then currently that process also allows just 10 acres or more for many of these, for instance, marijuana farms, they're at 9 acres or less. And so they're not going through that process because they're building greenhouses to be able to take that on. So this would close out those two loopholes that are currently in the AFIDA process that are under this committee's jurisdiction. So we've tried to be able to work through the process, try to be able to get this right in a way that we think actually helps us as a nation to be able to protect our ag, and quite frankly, also to be able to deal with criminal organizations that are trying to take advantage of our very open nation. So thank you for hearing this out and for doing the work to be able to address this.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Lankford, and it certainly brings a different perspective. My mother grew up on their family farm in Oklahoma picking cotton, and so this is a very different picture that you're portraying as of what's happening. So appreciate your legislation and your focus on this very much. Senator Rounds has joined us, part of the duo of Senator Tester and Senator Rounds. I know there's another important committee meeting going on in banking and that you're both coming back and forth, but we wanted to give you an opportunity since you both worked so hard in the NDAA to be able to have your amendment passed, and we wanted to give you a few moments to share what that does.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and I suspect that Senator Tester will be here shortly. We were both at the banking hearing together. First, let me just say good morning, and I do believe that it is truly a privilege to be here today with the Senate Committee on Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry. I want to thank you, Madam Chair, along with Ranking Member Bozeman, for taking a special interest in this issue and inviting me to provide some remarks at the hearing today, along with Senator Tester, who is just arriving now. Don't worry, I'm just holding things up long enough for you to get here.
I think Senator Tester always knows how to make an entrance.
Keep the filibustering, buddy.
Well, as you all know, China and Russia are our near-peer adversaries, and North Korea and Iran are no friends of the United States. These four adversaries view America as their top competitor and only wish to gain advantage and opportunities to surveil our nation's capabilities and resources. Over the course of the last several years, it has become very apparent that an increasing number of foreign purchases of American agricultural land is posing a threat to national security. After listening to the concerns of American producers, Senator Tester and I introduced the Promoting Agriculture Safeguards and Security, or PASS Act, to ban China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran from purchasing American farmland or ag businesses. Key portions of this legislation were included in Amendment number 813 to the Senate-passed National Defense Authorization Act. It's now referred to as Section 1086. Section 1086 would strengthen our national security while still providing access and opportunity for our foreign partners. Foreign investment in the U.S. real estate and farmland presents many economic opportunities, but in some cases can present significant consequences to our national security, trade, and food security. While Chinese entities currently hold slightly less than 1% of all foreign-held acres in the United States, the volume of their holdings have surged exponentially over the last 13 years. from roughly 13,000 acres to over 352,000 acres. And foreign ownership and investment in the United States agricultural land nearly doubled. In recent years, our country has seen firsthand attempts by our near-peer competitors to acquire land adjacent to our military bases. In 2020, a Chinese-linked company planned to build a wind energy farm project near Del Rio, Texas, only miles away from Laughlin Air Force Base, where U.S. pilots are trained. In 2022, a Chinese-linked company attempted to build a corn milling plant on farmland near a sensitive Air Force base outside Grand Forks, North Dakota. Treasury later determined that they did not have the proper jurisdiction to act in this case, which demonstrates the need for this section to become law. The legislation, as included in the Senate-passed version of the NDAA, would require the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, or CFIUS, to prohibit China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran from purchasing agricultural land and agricultural businesses in the United States and make reforms to the CFIUS process to improve our country's ability to protect our national security. However, this legislation would also allow the President of the United States to waive the requirement prohibiting a purchase by one of these four countries. This decision would be made on a case-by-case basis if it is deemed that doing so is in the national security interest of the United States and would require a report to Congress by the President. It also adds the Secretary of Ag as an ex officio member of CFIUS, giving them the ability to consult on all cases if they so choose. Additionally, this legislation does not alter current exemptions for our trusted allies, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, to make purchases without being subject to CFIUS review. I want to thank my friend from Montana, Senator Tester, for his hard work to get our amendment into the Senate-passed FY24 NDAA and on our original bill, the PASS Act. This is a common sense provision that will make our homeland more secure. However, it is just the first step in addressing this issue on a broader scale. Specifically, I commend the work done by Chairman Stabenow, Senator Ernst, Senator Braun, and others on several pieces of legislation to enhance the Agricultural Foreign Investment Disclosure Act, a critical piece to addressing this issue. As the committee gets closer to completing its work on the Farm Bill, I request that you build on what we started with Section 1086 with additional legislation, because there is more work to be done. I again want to thank the chairwoman and ranking member for holding this hearing and allowing non-committee members to provide their perspective. I look forward to working with the members of the Senate Ag Committee on this critical issue. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Senator Rounds, and we so appreciate your leadership, Senator Tester's leadership on what is now Section 1086. Senator Tester, welcome. Thank you so much for all of your leadership on this issue. It's very important, and we're glad to have you before the committee.
I will do my best to be very brief. I want to thank you, Chairman Stabenow, Ranking Member Bozeman, for having this hearing. I think it's a very important hearing. I want to thank you for the courtesy of allowing 4 senators that don't sit on this committee to be able to speak to this issue, because I think it's a very important issue. Look, many of you know, in fact, I think all of you know, I have a real life outside the Senate. I'm a farmer. I can tell you that everybody in this room also knows that food security is national security. When we're talking about somebody like the Chinese Communist Party, which is what Senator Rounds referred to, putting up a corn milling plant within miles of a sensitive Air Force base, and our agencies can't do anything about it, we need to give them the authority. We need to make sure that this doesn't happen. Because quite honestly, and some of you know this, probably all of you know this, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, they are not friends of ours. They want to do things to make us less than what we are today. So we shouldn't allow these bad actors to be on our soil. Honestly, the fact is that if they're there to have impacts on our food supply, that's bad business. If they're there to spy on us, they shouldn't be allowed to spy on us anywhere in the world, and certainly not on our own soil. Senator Rounds spoke a lot about what I was going to talk about in remarks. There's no need repeating it. We've had some successes in this Congress, but none of them have got to the president's desk yet. I appreciate the fact that you guys are doing this and showing the kind of leadership in a committee that's all things agriculture, because this is important. It's important for this nation's food security, our national security. It's important for our citizenry. Thank you for doing this hearing.
Well, thank you so much. We deeply appreciate, we hope the NDAA is passed by the Senate, gets to the president's desk so he can sign it. And we appreciate all of you and your leadership in bringing together all the various pieces that we need to be focused on this issue. Thank you so much. We will now ask our three witnesses, our panel, to join us. You're welcome to join us at the table. Thank you so much.
I just want to say for the record that Mr. Ortega has too much hair. I feel like
For the record, we will indicate that Senator Booker is deeply concerned.
I think it is a personal attack.
Yeah.
I want it noted.
All right. Well, good morning. Let me introduce our three witnesses and then ask each of you to make some comments. Gloria Montano Green is the Deputy Undersecretary for Farm Production and Conservation, FPAC. In her position, Montano Green leads agencies that deliver farm programs and services to farmers, ranchers, and other producers. She is also a former state executive director for the Farm Service Agency in Arizona. So we so appreciate your being with us. Our next witness that Senator Booker has attacked so far, Mr. Baldwin, I will turn to you to introduce, because he's from your state, and I think you may be offended by what Senator Booker said. I'm not sure. So.
Well, we're pleased to have Mr. Harrison Pittman, a proud Arkansan, with us on the panel today. Harrison is the director of the National Agricultural Law Center, a University of Arkansas System Division of Agriculture. He received his Juris Doctor and LLM from the University of Arkansas Law School in Little Rock and Fayetteville, respectively, and has worked at the center since 2001. Harrison is an active member of the American Agricultural Law Association and is a frequent presenter on a range of topics, including the Farm Bill, water law, and environmental law. He has authored articles on numerous subjects, including the National Organic Program, the constitutionality of corporate farming laws, pesticide litigation, the Packers and Stockyards Act, and the list goes on and on. Many food, environment, and agriculture stakeholders depend on Harrison and his team to work to provide accessible, dependable, and objective legal analysis. So we're all proud of the work that they do. Thank you, Harrison, for taking the time to be with us, and a special thanks to the rest of the panel for your willingness to be with us today.
Thank you so much. And Senator Booker, I misheard you. You were actually attacking my witness from Michigan State University. So I just want to say, although I see two people
Harrison's
that
got
have wonderful
plenty of
heads
hair,
of
too.
hair. So yes. So, but I'm so pleased that Dr. David Ortega, a food and agricultural economist and professor at Michigan State University, is with us today. Welcome. His research focuses on understanding consumer, producer, and agribusiness decision-making to better inform food policy. Dr. Ortega has vast experience studying food systems in various developing and emerging countries, and we are so pleased Dr. Ortega, that you are with us this morning. So let me turn first to Deputy Undersecretary Montano Green. We would ask for 5 minutes and then anything further you would like to submit for the record. Good morning.
Good morning. Chairwoman Stabenow, Ranking Member Bozeman, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to come before you today to discuss the Agricultural Foreign Investment Disclosure Act of 1978, often called AFIDA. It's an honor to serve as Deputy Undersecretary for Farm Production and Conservation, which we regularly call FPAC. It's rewarding work. It's the one mission area at USDA that houses all the producer-facing agencies. Every day, I get to work with 4 agencies across the country. It's Farm Service Agency, the Risk Management Agency, Natural Resources Conservation Service, and the FPAC Business Center to provide farmers, ranchers, and forest landowners support, be it through farm loans, disaster programs, safety net, risk management, conservation programs, and other items that they might be facing. It's an honor, a privilege, and a great responsibility to work alongside more than 20,000 public servants across more than 2,900 offices that support our producers. FPAC is also the mission area that houses the filing of AFIDA. I want to take a moment to be able to recognize this mighty AFIDA team. FPAC's economic and policy analysis staff, who work on AFIDA, and are working hard to improve outreach and filing information to ensure they're getting the best information possible. Any foreign person who buys, sells, or holds a direct or indirect interest in U.S. agricultural land must report their holdings and transactions to USDA through the AFIDA report, also known as FSA Form 153. Leaseholds of 10 years or more on agricultural land, often involving wind turbine and solar panel interests, must also submit a report to USDA. AFIDA is self-reporting. Currently, the AFIDA reporting system uses a paper-based approach to data collection. We currently have no way to identify the geographic location of AFIDA filings, more specifically than the country level. The process to report and track foreign-owned agricultural land is complex. There is not currently a system at the national, state, or local level that tracks deeds or leases, and there is no automated reporting mechanism to aggregate information and contribute to the disclosure report. Any system for tracking land purchases and owners would be complicated, expensive, and create a potential risk to producer privacy, the price of agricultural land, and individual American seller interests. There are more than 3,000 county clerks and recorders' offices, or their equivalent, more than 50 state systems, and more than 500 sovereign tribal nations processing and tracking of land ownership and land transfer. This is a patchwork to track and report foreign and owned agricultural land is challenging. As Congress considers the issues around the ownership of agricultural land, it'll be essential for them to consider a system that balances these issues and is workable for USDA, for producers, for landowners, and for local government. In addition to the complicated patchwork system, USDA is under-resourced, and the staff have limited authorities that are less expansive in scope than those outside of USDA may recognize. We are doing our best. We're working to stretch our resources and making improvements. We have added additional staff. We're working to update the FSA 153 form. We anticipate that the revised form will ask questions that will help us address the impact of foreign ownership on U.S. agricultural land. I want to recognize that in Section 773 of the Consolidated Appropriation Act of 2023, Congress did direct USDA to modernize the AFIDA reporting system within 3 years via an online electronic filing portal linked to a queryable. USDA was not provided funding to implement these requirements. To move forward with the Section 773 language, in the absence of funding, the department has taken several low-cost steps. In early June of 2023, USDA posted Excel spreadsheets for each year from 2011 to 2021 with the detailed data underlying the annual report to Congress. This is what could be done with the funding we received. While there are challenges to the current reporting system, we understand the task. We agree that there are incredibly important issues and look forward to working with Congress to address them. Thank you for the invitation and the time today.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate your being here today. Mr. Pittman, welcome.
Chairwoman Stabenow, Ranking Member Bozeman, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to move that down a little bit, to be here with you today and testify as part of this hearing on foreign ownership of U.S. agriculture. As you all know, this is an issue of great national significance, and it's one that has garnered significant attention throughout the country. And in our experience, it's been with stakeholder groups all throughout the ag industry and then those that aren't traditionally involved in ag issues. My opening remarks will focus on the National Agricultural Law Center, our role with this, and kind of an overview of what's happening at the state and federal level. Very quickly about the National Agricultural Law Center. In 1987, Congress established the center to be an objective, neutral, nonpartisan source of agricultural and food law research and information for the nation's agricultural community. We operate in partnership with the USDA Agricultural Research Service, National Agricultural Library, and as the ranking member mentioned, we are a standalone unit of the University of Arkansas System Division of Agriculture. On a routine basis, we provide research and outreach on a wide range of issues to producers of all sizes and commodities throughout the United States, state departments of agriculture, state and federal policymakers, farm organizations, attorneys, students, and many, many more. We do not engage in legal or policy advocacy of any kind. The Center's been very involved on the issue of foreign ownership of agriculture, and specifically on the issue of foreign ownership of agricultural land. And particularly so in the last 2 to 3 years. Just as I'm here today, one of my colleagues, Micah Brown, is actually testifying before the Mississippi legislature on foreign ownership. Was in Nebraska last week. I'll be in Indiana next week. And that's just a snapshot in time of what we have going on in this area. In terms of state level activity, in 2021 and 2022, at the state level, we saw a very significant increase in activity in the number of proposals. And it was a historical shift that was noteworthy. And most of those proposals focused on foreign ownership at large. Transferring over into 2023, that level of an intensity and activity basically increased threefold across the country. In fact, there's really not very many states left that haven't had at least one or more proposals at the state level. And those shifted more away from a focus on foreign ownership at large, but more towards what we often refer to as the Big Four: China, North Korea, Russia, and Iran. Likewise, at the federal level, there's been a very significant increase. There's nearly 24 proposals between the House and the Senate, but most of these fall into 3 basic categories. They're amendments to a FIDA or a FIDA, depending on how you want to say that, amendments to the Defense Production Act of 1950, and then restrictions on federal funding, particularly those dealing with federal farm programs through USDA. That doesn't capture everything, of course. In the written testimony, I have an outline with links to all the proposals, and of course on our website we have myriad resources that would be useful to you. Finally, I think FIDA is such an important focus. Some quick observations here. First, it's a simple statement, but it bears noting that agriculture in the United States and the world around it has changed considerably, just in the last few years, but certainly in the last 3 or 4 decades. Even things, when we think of a FIDA, and we've heard mention of leases already. In 1978, when Congress enacted a FIDA, the concept of a lease was a lot more basic than it is today. Today we're thinking about solar leases, wind energy, and even carbon on rural lands across the country. There was really no way that Congress or USDA could have accounted for that back at that time. Land transactions have become typically more complicated. They've become bigger. I don't know if you guys saw the news yesterday. We had the record ag land sale, 35,000-ish acres, or dollars per acre in the state of Missouri. The world of ag innovation and ag research has changed in ways that are just beyond our imagination back in the late 70s. And finally, along that thread, I would say that our national economy's become far more interdependent on trading partners like Mexico and China and Canada and obviously many other countries. I would also add that when it comes to a FIDA, and I see my yellow light, so I want to bring it in for a landing here. One of the things I'd highlight to you, and this might be more for a lot of the staffers that are here, when we say a FIDA, you're really saying 4 things. You're saying the statute, you're saying the regulations, the Farm Service Agency Handbook, and then FSA 153. And a change to one of those is likely to require a change to any one of the other. And missing that point could very well lend itself to having trouble with implementation later on down the line. There's more to say, lots to say about FIDA. I'll conclude on the last part here. When you look at how it's implemented today in 2023, if you really want to nerd out on it, which I encourage, the most formative time period to where we are today is between December 1978 and August of 1979. That's when Congress passed the FIDA and provided agency authority to USDA. So most of the implementation has occurred through rulemaking. And that's when most of the activity occurred that really leads to the implementation that's today. So going back to that original thought about how much things have changed, put yourself in the shoes of somebody in 1978 and 79, and then having hindsight today to look back on that. And then if you think a fight is easy, you probably haven't spent enough time with it. If you think it's hard, it's probably harder than you think. The devil's in the details, and I'll conclude there. More than happy to answer questions today and in the future for this and other issues that come up. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you so much. It is complicated, and we appreciate you being involved and giving us input as we work through it. Dr. Ortega, welcome. We're so glad you're here.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Chairwoman Stabenow, Ranking Member Bozeman, and members of the committee, thank you for the invitation to be here today. The U.S. has nearly 1.3 billion acres of privately held agricultural land, of which around 40 million were foreign-owned in 2021, a 50% rise from 2011. Currently, 3.1% of American agricultural land is foreign-owned. Contrary to popular belief, foreign governments don't typically own this land. Most is owned by Canadian interests, with significant holdings from entities in Europe. Holdings from China are under 1% of foreign-held agricultural land. These entities buy land for food production, energy, or as an investment due to its stable growth and returns. Most states have minimal foreign holdings, often concentrated regionally. In my home state of Michigan, most foreign-held agricultural land can be found in the Upper Peninsula. Foreign investments in these lands can be a source of economic growth, employment, and job creation in local communities. One concern over foreign ownership of agricultural land stems in part from Lansing land prices and the potential for foreign demand to price farmers out of the market. However, there is no clear evidence that foreign ownership is causing U.S. farmland prices to rise. Under current U.S. federal law, there is no limitation to foreign entities acquiring agricultural land. However, several states have some type of restriction on foreign ownership. Some proposals, as we have heard today, have suggested even broader restrictions. Given the potential for some of these proposals to have unintended consequences, careful consideration is needed to understand their impact on the broader U.S. agri-food system. Analysis of land values in states with varying restrictions and those without does not show a clear pattern. In fact, some results even contradict expectations that these bans would dampen land value increases. FIDA mandates foreign entities to report transactions of foreign lands to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Enforcement of reporting requirements have been inconsistent and at times lax. This has been attributed to low staffing levels in the agency. Considering the rise in foreign holdings over the past decade, this is very problematic. How many foreign agricultural land acquisitions have gone unreported, and by whom? Failure to address these questions limits our ability to draw meaningful conclusions from any economic analysis on the impact of these purchases, among other concerns. Chinese ownership of U.S. agricultural land has garnered attention due to high-profile acquisitions and rising Sino-American tensions. Last year, the Fufeng Group's land acquisition near the Air Force Base in North Dakota became controversial. A subsequent corn mill project, which promised significant economic benefits to the region, was canceled due to national security concerns. The Chinese government doesn't directly own any U.S. agricultural land. Chinese entities own less than 1% of the 3% of foreign-held agricultural land. This represents 0.03% of all U.S. agricultural land and less than many other countries, including Portugal and Luxembourg. Over 80% of the Chinese-owned land belongs to Smithfield Foods and a billionaire investor. China's foreign investment strategy has shifted from the early 2000s to now include the acquisition of agribusinesses like Smithfield Foods. Issues over consolidation, further business acquisitions, and concerns surrounding intellectual property and the agri-food sector need to be carefully monitored and evaluated. Food security concerns naturally arise when discussing foreign ownership of American farmland. The U.S. is not only self-sufficient in basic food production, but we also provide food for many across the globe. We are the breadbasket of the world. Food insecurity arises in our country not because of production deficits, but because of issues of affordability and accessibility. I will conclude by noting that American farmland is a critically valuable and finite resource. While in my view, the foreign acquisition of U.S. agricultural land by foreign entities doesn't threaten our ability to produce food, it does raise specific and sometimes local concerns. It's vital that any legislative and regulatory response be evidence-based, consider the broader agri-food landscape, and aim to strike a balance between safeguarding our national interest and security and promoting economic growth and opportunity. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you so much. We very much appreciate your being here today, and we will start with questions. Deputy Undersecretary Montano Green, your testimony highlights really the complexity, I think all of yours did, the complexity and challenges in monitoring land ownership with limited resources. The Farmland Act I introduced with Senator Ernst would expand the scope of CFIUS to include reviews of farmland purchases over a certain size, 320 acres or $5 million, and from certain countries. We know it's important that we have proper oversight, but we also know we have, as you've indicated, limited resources right now. So what changes might be needed to the Agriculture Foreign Investment Disclosure Act process to focus our resources on the real potential threats to U.S. food security?
Is that on? It's on, right? Yes. Thank you, Chairwoman, for that question. As you laid out, this is a very complex process now as laid out by the individuals with me. So first, maybe I'll approach the conversation about CFIUS. I want to start by saying it's not in my purview at FPAC. It's at USDA under the Office of Homeland Security. As you recognize, USDA is not a committee member, nor are we an ex officio member. And there has been conversations of the role USDA has. USDA was definitely, when we're called upon information, FPAC will provide that information moving forward. The complexity is the funding for some of the items. How do we make it from a paper-based process to a little bit more robust, as was shared? So I think some of that funding for the investments is one within USDA very explicitly for AFIDA. The staffing to make sure that we're able to do that. We're monitoring appropriations debates, and having a cut to the FPAC Business Center has impacts for how we stretch those dollars. And I think the other part is outside of USDA, the system that allows us to be able to have the database or the information that we're able to have that automation. We shared that the multiple thousands of county recorders where deeds are recorded locally has an impact for us to be able to have an understanding. There isn't a robust data system for us to be able to have an automated reporting system. So even if we move fully off of paper-based, it still requires very manual labor to be able to address and to be able to dig down into those items. So within USDA, there is some support and work, but that system collectively to be able to support investments and knowing the understanding needs to be there.
Thank you very much. Dr. Ortega, as someone who's studied China's food systems more closely over the years, is farmland investment something that countries like China are pursuing around the world? And where do you see trends in foreign investment in food and agriculture supply chains more broadly?
Thanks, Chairwoman, for the question. When it comes to China's foreign investment strategy in agriculture, it's important to understand that it's really driven by their desire to be self-sufficient. They have 20% of the world's population, but less than 10% of their land is arable. It's a big country, but a lot of it is mountainous terrain. And they are buying farmland across the world. We're seeing investments in farmland in places in sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, as well as Russia. But by and large, China's foreign investments in farmland have bypassed North America. They're really looking at acquiring agribusinesses like Smithfield. We saw ChemChina's takeover of Syngenta. And this is to exert more control over their import food supply chain. And I do foresee there being additional investments in this regard. But when it comes to actual American farmland, it's not something that I would consider as part of their current foreign investment strategy in agriculture.
Thank you. When we're talking about farmland today, but as I mentioned in my opening statement, I think that our agribusinesses should be as much of a concern. And Senator Grassley, your ears must be burning because I was speaking about you and our work together early on about Smithfield when they first were purchased by the Chinese business and of course, Chinese government are part of that, and our ongoing efforts to get USDA part of CFIUS because we know that food security is national security. But to follow a little bit more, Dr. Ortega, though, you had talked about potential unintended consequences when we're looking at placing restrictions on U.S. agricultural land ownership on citizens from certain countries. What should we be aware of as we're looking at this?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Chairwoman. This could really take many forms. There could be retaliation from other countries. It's important to note that the U.S. is one of the top investors in foreign agricultural land across the world. From 2000 to 2016, U.S. entities were involved in many agricultural land deals, amounting to more than 8 million acres worldwide in places like South America, Brazil, Argentina, also in Eastern Europe. And so there could be some retaliation that would affect American interests abroad. There are also trade implications. For example, China is their largest export market for U.S. agricultural and food products. We export a lot of our grain, our soybeans, our corn to China, as well as more consumer-oriented products like beef and pork. And in my view, it would be far easier for China to find new sources of these products than it would be for American farmers to find new export markets. So I think it's important to also be aware of potential trade impacts from some of these measures that could happen.
Thank you very much. Senator Boozman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Pittman, based on your legal analysis, do you find AFITA is currently written sufficiently such that it captures pertinent foreign investments in U.S. agricultural land? You mentioned the problem with it being written in the 1970s. Here we are now. Does it still work in that regard concerning that narrow area?
And to fight the microphone here a little bit. That's actually a difficult question, believe it or not. I would put that into two parts. The first is more of value judgment. People in this room, people around the country would have a different viewpoint potentially on whether AFITA is strong enough, whether it goes too far, whether it's on the mark or somewhere in the proximity of any of those on the spectrum. Where I think that before you get to that point, the part you go through, and this is how I break it down, AFITA I'd put as definitional and then situational, meaning more specifically, as was articulated a moment ago, foreign persons. It has a specific definition under the statute and the regulations. When you deal with foreign governments or foreign individuals, I think that's fairly easy. I mean, that's easy. When you get to the business entity aspect, it gets more difficult, and I think when you get to U.S. business entities, that becomes more difficult on the definitional side, meaning when is it that a U.S. entity is required to report under a FIDA? And that turns into what's, again, goes back to definitional, significant interest or substantial control, which is a linchpin of the entire reporting system. It's in the statute, not defined in the statute, but it's defined in the regulations. And again, I encourage people to go back to 78 to 79. It's changed since then, but that's where the foundation is laid. And then within significant interest or substantial control, you have some bright line tests, such as acting in concert or not acting in concert. And, to my knowledge, there's not a definition of those. And so going back to that part about the foreign persons and that U.S. entity example, it's not, what I would say is that the way that the rules are set up, when you kind of stretch them out on the table, a U.S. entity will report up to 3 tiers, T-I-E-R-S, tiers of ownership. And then it turns back into situational, meaning once that occurs, then the secretary is given the authority, discretion to then go ask for more information about foreign persons that are below that 3rd tier. And when that information comes in, it goes back to situational again, where they can ask for some more information. And so depending on, come full circle, on what your value judgment is on that, and we heard a lot about, resources being limited. I don't have any firsthand knowledge of it, but my guess is that USDA is not able to routinely go back and exercise on that situational side of going back and, potentially what I would just call the Garden of Eden on ownership in an entity. And so that's how I would analyze it. That's how I would encourage people to look at it, and then, inform on that, and of course, they'd have their own viewpoint on what that would be. There's probably other examples, but that's what came out when I was thinking it through here. So,
Madam Undersecretary, in regard to that, do you think USDA has the current authorities? Now, it sounds like you don't have the infrastructure to do the disclosure process and all that, and then you talked about all of this is being done by hand, and the difficulties there as we try and move forward. But discounting that, do you feel like you have the authority to move in if Congress wanted you to move in the direction of greater disclosure?
Oh, there it is. Sorry. Thank you for that, Senator. There are some, for your question to be able to look at the levels of details, some of the items that were mentioned by Mr. Pittman are not within the authority. We are currently reviewing the FSA form to be able to see if we can add items, not as a requirement, but as optional to report to be able to better engage. There are some expectations that we've received in various congressional inquiries and technical assistance where we've provided feedback on what additional authorities we might need if we wanted to be able to have some requirements and some reporting there. So I think it is as Congress decides what level of additional information we want in that disclosure form or additional engagement that USDA needs to move forward, we might need to consider that.
Very quickly, can you talk a little bit very quickly about what you do to verify the accuracy and completeness of information that you receive regarding this? Foreign disclosure.
So, sir, when the team receives the form, they review it. They go back and ask various levels of details. Sometimes they go and have conversations and engagement with the counties where that is being recorded, or the local FSA office is able to provide resources. Some of that information is based on local knowledge, not necessarily local FSA knowledge, but local county recorders on the level of information and filings that they also have to be able to reflect that. Some of that conversation is having engagements with their respective lawyers to be able to ask questions whenever the form has not been completed or if the form seems to have some gaps of information. So the team The team is doing what they can with the resources we have and is looking into the various layers and the third tier of ownership to be able to have those items and moving to gather as current information as they can.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Senator Booker.
Chairwoman and Ranking Member, thank you both for another really important hearing. I can't tell you how grateful I am to have this opportunity to question three extraordinary witnesses despite their haircuts. Look, who controls our farmland is really important, and honestly, my concerns also with who controls many other parts of our food system, including our seeds, meat processing, and grocery stores. This is all part of our national security. Indeed, as one of our witnesses already said, is food security is national security. In the last several decades, our entire economy, but especially the agricultural sector, has concentrated power and profits into the hands of a small group of corporations. And several of those big corporations are indeed foreign-owned, as has been mentioned by our witnesses. So I support legislation that would prevent foreign corporations, such as Smithfield, from continuing to purchase U.S. farmland. I have visited Duplin County, North Carolina, and seen firsthand what a bad corporate citizen Smithfield is, with their large factory farms poisoning the air and water and ruining the quality of life for local rural communities, all so that Smithfield can ship cheap pork back to China. However, an equally concerning issue to me, and an issue that I hope this committee will focus on and perhaps hold a hearing on, is the rate at which domestic corporations, such as pension funds and hedge funds, are buying up U.S. farmland as an investment strategy. According to a recent report, institutional investors spent over $12 billion to acquire U.S. farmland in 2021 alone. And these corporate investors now own approximately 35 million acres of U.S. farmland. I believe that our national food security depends on the farmers who are working the land having an opportunity to own the land. And I don't believe that our federal farm safety net programs like crop insurance should be used as a risk management strategy by Wall Street investment funds. That's why I recently introduced the Farmland for Farmers Act, which would prohibit these investment corporations from acquiring any additional U.S. farmland. The bill would also make the hedge funds and pension funds who currently own farmland ineligible for USDA safety net programs moving forward. Chairwoman, I request consent to enter into the record this letter of support for this bill, which is led by the National Family Farm Coalition and signed by over 70 farm groups.
So ordered without objection.
I'd like to direct my question to Mr. Pittman. Can you talk about how the issues of foreign investment in U.S. farmland and the purchase of our farmland by corporate investors such as Wall Street pension funds and hedge funds are really intertwined issues, and that the interconnected way in which some states actually have dealt with those two issues?
So, going in reverse chronological order, the way the states have handled that would be, on the one hand, corporate farming laws. They're sometimes referred to as anti-corporate farming laws. They're been historically predominant in the Midwestern states, but in other places too. And they have a history that traces back to pre what we know as the Great Depression era, but for agriculture, the Depression oftentimes we think started in the 1920s instead of the 1930s. So that's one aspect. The other's on these foreign ownership laws, which we've detailed enough. I don't think I need to go back through any of those. Historically, in the public record, I mentioned in my opening remarks how the ag industry's changed a lot. So obviously the transactions, the nature, the scope has evolved considerably. But on the corporate farming law side, a lot of these laws that go back, as I mentioned, out of North Dakota, 1920s on forward, and they were challenged under the different theories of the Constitution, or the constitutionality was challenged a handful of times, made their way to the United States Supreme Court, and the constitutionality was always upheld. And then more recently, in the last 2 decades, we've had some decisions under the Dormant Commerce Clause that called that into question. But along the way, the proponents of those laws, to get them enacted, and then as they were argued in the court system, it was about it was investors and institutional investors. And from a proponent's viewpoint, When you look at the public record on foreign ownership, both in what's been enacted at the state levels over the decades, but even if you go into the legislative history and the regulatory history of a FIDA, there you see similar concerns, a thread there from those. In fact, initially when the FIDA was enacted, that was what USDA was directed to report back on, impact on family farms and availability of land. And then in my own firsthand experience, I do hear those concerns raised. Of course, that's not to say I don't hear competing viewpoints, but about that, that this broader question of ownership, whether it be institutional and or foreign, that it basically, as someone, as we all know, when someone said earlier, not making any more land, that it becomes more difficult to compete to purchase land. And then the final thing, which I have to reflect on this a little bit more, but, there's, by my notion, there's 10 states that have their corporate farming law and their foreign ownership law in the same statute. So at some level, they've been welded together over the years in that way.
Yeah, thank you, sir, for that answer. I will maybe ask you to think about it in a question for the record as well as otherwise. I do appreciate the whole panel here. It's been extraordinary, as well as my colleagues beforehand. I'm hoping we can look more about corporate ownership. I've had some conversations with great colleagues across the aisle about it as well. And then finally, I just want to note for the record also that Mr. Pittman has an accent that is almost as awesome as a Jersey accent. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Senator Booker, and thank you for raising really important issues. We need to broaden the scope as we're looking at all of this. This is very important. And Senator Grassley, we're going to turn to you next, and Senator Marshall technically was next, but is deferring to you. And I will say again, we have invoked your name and leadership multiple times today. It's been a pleasure to work with you on this issue ever since we raised great concerns about the original Smithfield purchase, and thank you for working with so many of us on both sides of the aisle on this issue. Senator Grassley.
Well, thank you, Chairman and Ranking Member, for this very important hearing. And I don't know whether the figure of 100 million acres of farmland is going to be sold over the next 10 years, so this is a very timely hearing for you to have that. And you said you mentioned my name many times. I don't know whether you knew that I had an interest in this way back when I was a member of the House of Representatives and authored a piece of legislation, now law, in 1978 called the Agricultural Foreign Investment Disclosure Act. At that particular time, we didn't have any national records of foreign ownership of land, and this was required that the USDA keep track of this. Just last December, Senator Baldwin and I made improvements in that act with the Farmland Security Act, which was included in the Omnibus Appropriation Bill. The bill requires a report to Congress on these investments and to publish a prior year disclosure on an interactive and public USA data system. So that brings me to Mrs. Green. If you have taken steps to implement the changes included in the Farmland Security Act, and what have those steps been?
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for your leadership on this issue. Section 773 of the Consolidated Appropriation Act did designate that USDA needed to modernize the FIDA reporting system within 3 years and make it an online system accessible and queryable. We did not receive any funding to be able to implement that. So we looked at creating a cost-efficient one to move forward. This summer, around June, we uploaded an Excel file for 2011 to 2021, so those could be searchable and queryable on our website.
Okay, thank you for that answer, and I hope that Congress realizes that we were reluctant or didn't put money into it, but maybe getting it authorized is the necessary first step. Most recently, Senator Baldwin and I have introduced a bill to bring additional transparency and oversight to the foreign investment in farmland. The Farmland Security Act of 2023 imposes a new financial penalty on foreign owners or shell companies who fail to report or misreport their acreage. So, Ms. Green, how does the USDA currently track shell companies, and do you have any data on how many foreign shell companies may own farmland?
Sure, the report information that we receive is based on the self-disclosure. So the level of reporting that we provide annually is the information and the data that we do have available.
Okay. Do you think that the Department of Agriculture should have a permanent seat on the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, CFIUS as we call it?
Thank you for that question, sir. I want to be able to state that it is not within my purview at FPAC regarding the decision for the department to serve on CFIUS. That would be in the purview of the Office of Homeland Security. But what I can say is to be able to repeat things that my boss has definitely shared, and most recently was at Monday's White House press briefing, that the Secretary was asked a very similar question on Monday, and he stated that he does support USDA having a more robust role in on CFIUS.
Okay. And then, Mr. Pittman, a lot of credit goes to my state of Iowa for having some of the best laws on the books when it comes to foreign land ownership. Because of these restrictions, Iowa does not have the issues that other states have had. In your research, have you encountered any state laws that could serve as an example for federal legislation that could be enacted?
The short answer is no, because it's not just a patchwork of legislation, it's a historical patchwork of legislation. And so it's difficult to find one that would be a model. There are unique differences in Iowa to Missouri to Pennsylvania to South Carolina and on and on. Some of these laws were put into place, I think of Pennsylvania in particular, 1791 and 1818. They've been unamended ever since. It'd be hard to use that as a model law. And so we don't really have a lot of uniformity yet that would allow for something like that. It'd be hard to do. And, you know, and in that historical perspective, the reason so many of these laws are in the Midwest is that at one point that was the western boundaries of the United States. And so it just has a historical underpinning to it. And so they were enacted at a very different time. Many have been amended in some ways. Some have not been amended very much. It'd be hard to do.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much. Senator Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you and the ranking member for holding this important discussion today. I really appreciate it. Colorado agriculture contributes $47 billion to the state's economy, with nearly 39,000 farms and ranches spread over 32 million acres. But my state ranks third in the nation in foreign-owned farm and ranch land, behind only Texas and Maine, which raises economic and national security challenges for us. This upward trend is incredibly concerning, not just for the sake of our vital land resources, but also for our precious water resources, which, as you know, in the West are tied to the land. Water has the same legal property rights as land. Sometimes it's often more important than land. So as we grapple with how to handle land resources, we should do the same for water. On the economic front, when foreign buyers purchase land and the corresponding water rights, it drives their prices up. Colorado family farmers and ranchers, can't afford it. And outside of the Agricultural Foreign Investment Disclosure Act, USDA has minimal authority when it comes to foreign investments, including monitoring or weighing in or on any of these transactions to determine their effect on national security. So, Ms. Montano Green, while respecting private market transactions, what role do you believe the agency could play to mitigate economic and national security concerns related to heightened foreign investments in our land and water resources?
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
As a Westerner, I definitely appreciate the impact of water as a natural resource, and so thank you for being a champion on those items and issues. USDA understands that this is important for national security and that land resources and all resources are very important. Our authority does not allow us to stop the selling of foreign land. We do not have authority to have a decision in foreign or domestic land purchases and leases. We are doing our job to be able to have the Foreign Land Disclosure Act. Questions have been asked about our role within CFIUS, and my understanding, although it's not in my purview, is that infrastructure that we've been talking about, that complication of having that way to better understand who is purchasing and who's moving is sometimes outside of the USDA role. We will continue to do our work to implement the foreign land disclosure work and to be able to continue to work with Congress on working on solutions.
Well, I really appreciate the clarity of your answer, Ms. Montano Green, and you're right about both the lack of jurisdiction and also CFIUS. So you have anticipated my next question. So earlier this year, and this is for the whole panel, earlier this year, Senator Lankford, my colleague on the Intel Committee, and I introduced the Security and Oversight of International Landholdings Act, or the SOIL Act, as a means to address foreign investment oversight. Our bill would not limit private agricultural land real estate transactions, a topic I understand worries some producers, but the bill would require CFIUS, the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, an important national security committee, to review agricultural land acquisition deals from countries with non-market economies, including China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, that pose a national security threat risk to the United States. It would also require the committee to consult the Secretary of Agriculture on such deals. Would each of the witnesses today share how they believe Congress should reform the committee's authorities to help address the increase in foreign-owned U.S. farmland? Why don't we start here in the middle and we'll go around. Thank you.
Thank you for that. In terms of an opinion about what Congress should do, I'm going to bail out on that one. From the National Ag Law Center perspective, we don't engage in advocacy or policy, legal or policy-wise. What I could add to that, I think, there's obviously a number of proposals to add the Secretary of Agriculture to CFIUS. I think everybody here knows that in the House it passed 42 to nothing a few days ago on that very measure. But under the Defense Production Act of 1950, there is, in addition to the efforts legislatively, there is in the statute authority for the president to place other people on CFIUS. I think it's the last paragraph. I think it's paragraph J of that section. But as far as an opinion on what Congress should do with it, I don't have an opinion on that.
Yep. No, Senator, thanks for the question. I'll just add, I think it's important that, future land deals and acquisitions receive proper scrutiny. I can't really speak to, what policies should be implemented to do that necessarily. But I would just reiterate what I mentioned during my testimony, that whatever action and regulatory response be evidence-based and sort of look to strike a balance between our national security and also fostering economic growth and opportunity.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your leadership. Senator Lankford was here earlier and acknowledged that the two of you were working on this. It was very important. All right, we are now going to turn to Senator Marshall. Good morning.
All right, Madam Chair, good to see you, and Ranking Member, good morning, and welcome to our witnesses. BGI is a China-based biotech company tied at the hips to the Chinese Communist Party and Chinese military that's been leading China's efforts to create the world's largest genomic repository. Our USDA has provided grant dollars over the past decade to BGI for genomic gathering and data storage. Of great immediate concern, though, is its relationships with USDA and the American scientific community. BGI has access to genetic information of American citizens. BGI is listed as concerned by the NCSC, the Department of Defense, and the U.S. Department of Commerce. I want to stop and emphasize the greater national security threat we face in agriculture and our nation's ability to feed itself lies in this backdrop of China's goal to steal our intellectual property and then create and manipulate the world's largest genomic repository. Here's my concern. To borrow from the Wall Street Journal article, World War III will be fought with biological and computer viruses simultaneously. Next, I want to talk about the Earth Biogenome Project, EBP, which is an international cooperative initiative to sequence the DNA of more than 1.5 million species. BGI provides data collection and data storage for EBP. And please realize this again, the USDA continues to maintain a relationship with the Earth Biogenome Project today. Now, here's the important point. Here's the theme. In China's relationship with our nation and others, their goal is to obtain access to intellectual property while we pay for the research and development. The intellectual property is what's so very important in this relationship. And again, we pay for it, we do the research, they get the intellectual property. By maintaining relationships with the CCP-related entities, directly or indirectly, we place American citizens and our food supply at risk. There's no guardrail, there is no contract, no ethics of scientific research, nothing the CCP respects, as we witnessed by their takedown of valuable DNA sequencing data during the Chinese-created COVID pandemic. Again, my national security issue is this. While I acknowledge all the good that can be done from genomic collection, it doesn't take much imagination to realize the potential catastrophic biotech attacks rogue nations or terrorists could wage on Americans. So my first question for Madam Undersecretary is this, and I know this is not your exact purview with USDA, but do you agree that EBP and BGI pose a national security threat to our nation? And should we continue to have this relationship with either of those entities?
Senator, USDA is definitely concerned about agriculture and its role as it's connected to national security. We feed this country, and so we know agriculture is very key to that. With regard to this question, this is fully outside of my purview. FPAC gets to be the program-facing entities of it. If it would be okay with you, I'd like to take that back to my colleagues over in the Research Education Division to be able to help me better respond to that.
Great, I appreciate that. We did send a letter previously, and we'll be waiting the answers here. The plot thickens, though. We described an ever-widening web here. The Earth Biogenome Project and BGI are also part of something even bigger called the Global Virome Project, GVP, which was also formed and created with American dollars. More accurately described, the Global Virome Project became part of the EBP, so GVP is able to expand its global reach even more while it's been able to hide behind this larger umbrella of the EBP, which has made tracking of the Global Virome Project activities even more difficult, a tangled web indeed. And today, GVP supports the Trinity Challenge. So what's the Trinity Challenge, you might ask? The Trinity Challenge has a goal to collect the DNA of every human, animal, and plant across the world. We as a nation are once again financing the research and giving the Chinese Communist Party access to a gold mine of intellectual property that can and will be used against us. So again, for Madam Secretary, 2 questions. Is it ever safe to do research with China? And next, what are the potential bioweapons that could result from this research that could impact American food security?
Senator, thank you for that concern. USDA is very much concerned on national security issues and how agriculture is part of that. I'd like to take that question back to my colleagues to better provide you an answer and to give you a commentary on it.
If I could, Dr. Ortega, you've been involved with China on and off. Do you feel it's ever safe to do research with China?
Senator, thanks for your question. You know, this is a very complex issue. And, you know, I will say we have very talented Chinese Americans and Chinese scientists working at land-grant institutions here in the United States. I think it is in our national interest to collaborate with China on research. But we have to make sure that it's done in a very fair way. That's all that I'm able to comment.
I'd love to see how you vet these people, but that's probably a question for another day. But thank you so much for your answers, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Senator Welch, welcome.
It's good to be here. Thank you, Madam Chair. I share the concern about foreign ownership, Chinese ownership in particular. A lot of that has been covered by my colleagues. But I also share the concern about the incredible challenges for young, aspiring farmers to get access to land. And also, I'm very concerned, and a lot of that has to do with the high price and, of course, corporate consolidation. And as I understand it, between 2011 and 2021, foreign ownership increased from 2% to 3.1%. Most of that foreign ownership is non-Chinese. Chinese ownership is less than 1% of all foreign-held acres, and I think a lot of that is around installations that do need security. So there's obviously a link between their ownership and trying to be close to military installations. But 81% of America's farmed cropland is controlled by 15% of farms. So this is an incredible amount of consolidation. Small family farms, those that earn less than $350,000 in gross cash income, accounted for 89% of all farms. We have a lot of those small farms in Vermont. But large-scale farms, 1 million or more, accounted for about 3% of farms, but 47% of the value. I'm going to ask Dr. Ortega, in your testimony, you mentioned that the foreign acquisition of U.S. agricultural land by foreign entities does not threaten our ability to produce food, with the caveat that it does raise specific and sometimes local concerns. However, the consolidation of farmland by large corporate entities also poses significant challenges for our farmers. Can you speak on the extent of corporate consolidation in the agricultural sector and what challenges that consolidation poses for our economy and our farmers?
Yes, thank you, Senator, for that question, and thanks for highlighting this very important issue. It's also been brought up earlier with Senator Booker's comments.
Right. That's right.
The issue of corporate ownership of farmland and farm consolidation is very, very important, especially as it affects new and young beginner farmers as we look at an aging farmer population. One constraint to being able to answer your question fully is data availability. We don't have high-frequency data on this issue. There is a survey that was recently done by the National Young Farmers Coalition last year, done over 1,000 farmers, many thousand farmers under the age of 40, and a lot of these farmers noted that access to farmland was critically important, but it was also challenging given the rising land prices. So it's an issue that I think needs to be better informed by having more access to data on farm ownership, consolidation, given how fast these trends are changing in the industry.
Thank you very much. And, perhaps I'll ask Undersecretary Montano Green, any suggestions on what we can do about this? I mean, the big operators have the cash and they can outbid the small farmers, and we need those small farmers. So I wonder what concrete suggestions that you might suggest to us.
Senator, if I could take that in two approaches with what USDA is doing and how we could maybe continue to collaborate with the senators and Congress. First, for land access, capital, and market, thank you for the Inflation Reduction Act. We had $300 million to be able to implement a program, to be able to study this and to be able to think about providing grant programs. We just announced those projects earlier this summer. Looking forward to see the results and the returns so we can better be informed on how we can provide better tools for young beginning farmers and for communities that are smaller, low-income farmers looking to be able to have access to those. So just thank you for that. The American Rescue Plan, the Inflation Reduction Act was able to provide that. With regard to consolidation and monopolies, while it's not explicitly in my purview at FPAC, the department has been doing quite a bit of work on that to move forward. with the American Rescue Plan, the food system transformation to be able to think about local and regional foods and those aspects. FPAC has participated with our colleagues over in the marketing regional program. The other is this summer, USDA launched a partnership with state attorney generals to go after corporate bad actors who are against antitrust laws. We've been working to be able to address the Packers and Stockyards Act, and then just be able to robustly think about how we're addressing those smaller farmer needs as we move forward.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Senator Ernst.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today as well. Chairwoman Stabenow, I appreciate you calling this hearing today on this important issue. I think so many of us are really concerned about this issue, and we've worked very closely together on it to modernize the Agricultural Foreign Investment Disclosure Act. As our Iowa farmers know well, food security is national security. And in that same vein, I would be remiss not to express my frustration that we do not have at this time meaningful progress on the Farm Bill. On Monday morning, I drove up to the airport, and my route goes through southwest Iowa. And that entire way to the airport, we have farmers that are fully engaged in harvest right now. And it's such a great sight for me. I get very nostalgic. Some of the best memories I have from childhood are riding in the tractors and the combines with my grandpa and my dad and my uncle. And yet, these Iowa farmers, while they're out there, they're working hard. They're bringing in the harvest right now. They're feeding their livestock. And yet, Congress and this committee, we are set to let the 2018 Farm Bill expire in 3 days. And I really think this is a shame. I consistently hear from our farmers and ag leaders about the need for more farm in the Farm Bill. And there are serious concerns with the increasing foreign investment in American farmland today. China, our number one pacing threat, continues to grow their influence on the world stage under the weak leadership of the Biden administration. In 2021, we had a China-based company purchase 300 acres of valuable farmland only 20 minutes from the Grand Forks Air Force Base in North Dakota. And mind you, this base is home to some of the nation's most sensitive military drone technology. And as if that wasn't enough, earlier this year, the world watched as a Chinese spy balloon crossed over our sovereign border, gathering intelligence for the Chinese Communist Party over much of the Midwest and our nation's prized land. President Biden had the audacity to call this silly. Folks, this is concerning on many levels and a grave threat to our national security. According to USDA's 2021 OFIDA report, foreign persons hold an interest in approximately 40 million acres of U.S. ag land. That's more than the entire state of Iowa. More than Iowa. Foreign ownership and investment in our ag land has nearly doubled over the latest decade. It's time we get tough on China and our adversaries by drawing a line in the sand when it comes to our ag industry and the food security of our very own nation. Thankfully, in Iowa, we have provisions to protect our farmland, but we need to see strong protections across our nation. It's time we overhaul the system. We must modernize the Agricultural Foreign Investment Disclosure Act, which became law in 1978. And that's why I'm proud to have bipartisan action with Chairwoman Stabenow on our legislation, the Foreign Agricultural Restrictions to Maintain Local Agricultural and National Defense, or Farmland Act, to increase reporting, strengthen oversight, and send a strong, clear message to our adversaries that American farms are not their playground. Deputy Undersecretary Green, do you know, and can you report to this committee, how many foreign persons are participating in taxpayer-funded Farm Service Agency programs?
Senator, thank you for your concern. I want to acknowledge that USDA also believes that agriculture is an important part of national security and the work that we've been doing. The FIDA requires us to disclose foreign land. USDA does not have the authority to stop or sell of foreign land. We do not have the authority to have any decision in the process of foreign or domestic lands, domestic individuals, entities purchasing lands. With regard to the question of individuals within the program, we'll have to get back to you for that. We implement the program based on statute, and each program has its own respective statute governing eligibility for respective programs.
Okay, and it is concerning, and I think part of the problem in tracking this as well, foreign people participating in these programs, is that USDA has a very outdated process, and so we don't know this information, and that we have a voluntary filing system, and it's still paper-based. And so I think we have a lot of work to do within USDA to make sure that we are tracking this information, because if our taxpayer dollars are going to foreign individuals, we need to know that. And so again, I think the Farmland Act, it would address a lot of those concerns and make it much easier for us to track. So I see my time has expired, Madam Chair. Thank you very much for allowing me the time. I yield back.
Thank you so much. And let me all just say for the members that as we are diligently working on the Farm Bill, I've been involved in 6 of them. None of them, unfortunately, have ever hit the exact deadline. In 18, we went through till December, and I'm hoping with all of the committee leaning in and working together that we will be able to meet that timeline again, because it is so important that we do this for everyone who is impacted by all the issues in the Farm Bill. So thank you so much for raising that, and we will continue to work with you and all the members of the committee to make sure that happens. Let me turn to Senator Fetterman. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And let me say, I hope many of our colleagues agree the Chinese government and other U.S. adversaries should own zero agricultural land in our country. I believe that. I mean, they're taking back our pandas. You know, we should take back all of their farmland. You know, this is really a national security issue, and it's a food security issue. Pennsylvania is a leader on this issue, and a law requiring foreign disclosure on agricultural land, and I hear it's a good one. Mr. Pittman, you shared some state laws, but can you elaborate on how state laws and the few federal laws may work together?
Sure. So probably the best way to answer that is to take a snapshot in time back at the end of 1970s with the enactment of a FIDA in 1978. And at that time, the position that was struck was that matters of prohibition or even banning, although there's no state that has an absolute ban on foreign ownership, that would be a matter left to the states, and that the federal government would operate in the space of requiring reporting. And so from that backdrop, that's basically the paradigm in which this has moved forward since that time. And so there are things that the federal government can do, things like CFIUS, that the states simply can't. But that's basically the paradigm there. If anything to dig deeper in that, you'd look at each specific state law and how it compares. And states like Pennsylvania are very unique. You did mention that unique with the reporting requirement. It also has a requirement that the state, that the Department of Agriculture has a role in monitoring the FIDA data. But a lot of its provisions go back to Revolutionary War period and up into the early 1800s. So you have to take those things into account as well.
So can you speculate on why exactly would the Chinese want to own vast amounts of our farmland? You know, like.
Not the most qualified for that, but you know, I think as Dr. Ortega laid out, a lot of the ownership that currently is evidenced in the FIDA data traces back to the Smithfield transaction that occurred roughly a decade ago. And I'll leave it at that. I don't think I'm qualified beyond that.
Yeah. Secretary Montano Green, like my colleagues, I'm concerned with foreign countries and foreign corporations' ownership in our agricultural supply chain, in small farmers in PA. And there's over 56,000 of them here in Pennsylvania face enough hardships, and they don't need to compete with foreign governments buying our land. Secretary, how could Congress give USDA more resources, including and updating the Agricultural Foreign Investment Disclosure Act, to counter adversaries buying our farmland?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. We agree with you. USDA believes that agriculture is an important part of national security. Two approaches to that question. The first is thinking about your small producers and your family farms in Pennsylvania and the work we're doing to be able to invest and have better investments there. While not specifically with an FPAC, USDA has been investing in the food system transformation, which has a lot of local and regional investments. We've been working to address consolidation efforts and have a collaboration with attorney generals throughout the country to be able to address that. With regards to AFIDA, AFIDA itself is a disclosure act, and that is the authorities that we have. USDA does not have the authority to approve or decline purchases of land, domestic or foreign. So that is just one thing to be very clear of what USDA has within authorities. Within the support of the investments, we appreciate Congress's work in which they've given us some language within the Omnibus Appropriations Bill last year to be able to modernize and look forward to some support on that financially as well.
Thank you very much. Senator Highsmith.
Thank you, Chairwoman Stabenow and the Ranking Member Bozeman, and for this important hearing. And thank you to our witnesses. And Senator Bozeman, thank you for bringing Harrison along. We've worked together for many years, and it's certainly good to see you at the end of the table, Harrison. It truly is important for us to examine foreign investments in U.S. agriculture, and American food security is obviously the national security issue that we all know that it is. And we need to make sure that our foreign adversaries don't have the influence over those agricultural systems, and that is really important in Mississippi, where agriculture is our #1 industry. I'm pleased that the state of Mississippi has convened a study committee on foreign purchases of farmland there, and we're simply missing some information when it comes to this topic. So I'm glad my home state is investigating this issue, and I'm glad that we're examining it today here at a federal level, too. And Madam Undersecretary Montano, as you know, several legislative proposals this Congress seeks to include the Secretary of Agriculture as part of the Committee on Foreign Investments in the United States. And should this proposal become law, how do you envision USDA's participation on this committee?
Thank you, Senator. I just want to acknowledge that the role of CFIUS would not actually land within my mission area. It would land within the Office of Homeland Security within USDA. Having said that, I'll just repeat something that the Secretary had said earlier this week when he was asked this at the White House for a press briefing, and that he does acknowledge that it would be an important role for USDA to have a more robust role on CFIUS. With that implementation of it, it's not just the role of CFIUS, but it's also understanding the system to be able to report and to be able to gather the information. And not the AFIDA disclosure system, but understanding where deeds are registered about leases and how we're able to collaborate that information, and that information feeds in to better understand it. So some of the USDA role and then some of the systems roles within counties and states. And I do want to recognize your state of Mississippi for the work that they're taking on to better study this.
And you know, while I understand the Secretary is not a current member of the Committee of Foreign Investments, and you're saying it's falling under someone else, that the committee does flag certain cases to be reviewed by USDA, which falls under the responsibility of the USDA's Office of Homeland Security, obviously. However, the caseload is high while annual budgetary resources are rather limited. less than $1.4 million for the USDA Office of Homeland Security in the fiscal year of 2023 that we're in. What type of budgetary resources would USDA's Office of Homeland Security need to appropriately analyze all the cases in a timely manner?
Senator, thank you for the appreciation and the support for the staff that implement a lot of these programs and any of the resources that we need to move forward. The Office of Homeland Security is not under my purview, but if I can just make a general statement about impact of budget, we're all concerned about the appropriations and the cuts we have to have and what that means for stretching further resources. If it's okay with you, I'd like to take that back for the Office of Homeland Security to better provide a response on what the need would be for fiscal year 24.
Okay, and I have a little time left. Dr. Ortego, in your testimony, you mentioned China's investment in agribusinesses in other countries. And could you talk to us about China's investments in agricultural research and development and how the United States investment compares to that?
Senator, thank you for your question. This is what I would consider China's investments in agricultural research and technology one of the biggest threats to our food security. China, since 2011, became the largest funder of agricultural research and development, far surpassing the U.S. and the European Union. They are currently spending 5 times more on research and development today than they were 2 decades ago. In comparison, here in the U.S., our spending and investment has fallen and it's fallen by about a third over the last 2 decades. And it is close to about half of what China is spending, and their trajectory is upward. We are falling behind, and as you point this out, it's what I would consider to be one of the most serious threats to our food security is their level of investment.
Thank you for your answer, and my time is out. Harrison, you're off the hook.
Thank you so much. Senator Fisher.
Thank you, Madam Chairman and Ranking Member Bozeman, for holding a hearing on this important topic, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. In addition to serving on the Agriculture Committee, I also serve as a senior member on the Senate Armed Services Committee, and I am the ranking member on the Subcommittee on Strategic Forces, which is responsible for our nuclear deterrent, space systems, and our missile defense. It is no secret that many critical weapons systems are located in rural America near agricultural land. For example, in western Nebraska, that is home to the Minuteman III ICBMs, and it will soon be replaced by the Sentinel ICBMs. These weapon systems and airmen operating them keep Americans safe every day. We cannot let military installations hosting sensitive missions like these in Nebraska become vulnerable by allowing adversaries to purchase land nearby, which they can then conduct espionage or other nefarious activities. The Chinese Communist Party will actively seek and exploit any opportunity they see to do so. And so I believe we have to have a process in place to prevent them from doing that. Ms. Green, while foreign investments in ag land should be reported, we also need to ensure that the information is communicated to all relevant stakeholders. Does the USDA currently have any process in place for reporting to DOD if there is foreign investment in proximity to national security assets?
Thank you, Senator, for your service on both committees. We agree with you that USDA, that agriculture is part of national security and very important to that role. And we do not have the authority to be able to approve or to decline for purchases by foreign or domestic lands. With regards to, I'm sorry.
Oh, to reporting.
Yes,
to
with regard to the reporting.
Do you currently have the tools needed to do that, or
so with regard
does this committee need to look at something?
So with regard to reporting, I know there's been a lot of conversation about the role within CFIUS. It is not within the purview of FPAC. It has been raised to the Secretary. The Secretary has shared his intention that would be a good idea for us to serve there. With regards to report, even though we're not members of CFIUS, we serve in an ad hoc role. So when they call upon information to share and we're able to share that information, we do provide that with them. And so throughout the year, they look at our reports that we provide annually. And so we do know that that report is available publicly and individuals have been leveraging it. And if there's needs, they will seek additional information.
Also, you had mentioned that USDA is updating the FSA 153 form currently being used for a FIDA database. Can you expand on what questions will be added to the form? For example, currently, is there any way to know how much foreign-owned land U.S. farmers can be renting?
So the questions that are going to be updated in the 153 form, we've been gathering a group to be able to better understand the statute where information can be added that we're not seeking, has been shared by my colleagues, right? This is 45 years ago that it was passed, 44 years ago that it was written in regulation, and so agricultural land has been very different. Some of the information is not a requirement that we can have. If we want to be able to ask for their FSA farm records, that cannot be required to be put in there. We are going to be putting it as an optional to help us better track information. That is something that we do not have authority to be able to provide. But most of the requests and everything that we do is going to have to be of an authority to better reflect leases and better reflect some of the land ownership in agriculture communities.
As you know, people in agriculture are pretty individualistic, and they don't like a lot of reports. So I'll ask any of you, do you have suggestions on how we can make sure to get the information we need, where I think we're all looking at foreign-owned land, foreign renters of land, and I specifically am looking in certain vulnerable areas across this country. Do you have any ideas how we can differentiate on the reporting requirements so we're not putting undue burdens on citizens in this country? Anyone have an aha moment here?
You know, Senator, I think the issue is very complex here. It is self-reporting. It's on the books. It should also be known. We've been doing a lot of robust education with the realtor associations, various individuals that are within knowledge of deeds, making sure that our county offices, our state offices, we'd be more than willing to work with senators to be able to provide a toolkit if you want to be able to provide it to your respective communications to be able to report. I don't know if there's like a system that is not self-reporting. The complication is the multiple county recorders, the clerks, the multiple state systems that don't actually have an automated flag that then reports it up for us to be able to then scoop into this. So as we're moving forward to be able to, ad lib what the secretary said, there's not necessarily a foolproof way to be able to go. So we can do the work that we need to do at USDA in one part of the system, but the other systems throughout the country and the infrastructure for us to be able to pull a report. And we can rely on colleagues like such as Mr. Pittman and Dr. Ortega and other entities. But we do have multiple structures and a complex system that needs to be created to be able to better support.
Because we don't, I just don't think the government needs to interfere in people's private businesses by requiring more reporting. In Nebraska, we have 97% private ownership of land. So I understand the challenges that we're facing here as we do try to figure out how we can get a better handle on, have more information on the foreign ownership, which I think is a concern for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator Braun.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks to the witnesses for your participation and comments. I've got a statement I'm going to make and then a question for Madam Chair and Ranking Member. Senator Tester and I did a bill Protecting America's Agricultural Land from Foreign Harm Act, also sponsored by Senator Tuberville and Rubio. It would prohibit persons owned by, controlled by, or subject to the jurisdiction of China, Iran, North Korea, and Russia from owning or leasing American agricultural land. It would also stop these individuals from participating in any of the USDA programs. I vetted this bill carefully with the USDA, the intelligence community, and a handful of committees here in Congress. I'd like to submit letters of support for this legislation into the record from the Agribusiness Council of Indiana, America First Policy Institute, and Heritage Action.
So ordered without objection.
Thank you. Several bills are addressing this issue. I've got Kip Tom, a farmer from Indiana and a former ambassador to the United Nations for Food and Agriculture, and he capsulizes in a letter which I'd like to submit into the record as well.
So ordered without objection.
He points out that China has invested heavily in Belt and Road initiatives throughout Africa, somewhat in South America. We've seen them steal intellectual property, manipulate currencies, just do about anything out there that would not be in the category of a handshake business partner. We've watched them leverage corrupt influence over the WHO, perpetuating a years-long lie about how the COVID-19 pandemic started. Now China is running the same playbook on agriculture, using direct investments and regulatory capture at trusted international organizations to build power. Something has to give, and I'm concerned about what time we have left here this year, and if these bills do not make it into the Farm Bill or in a way through this committee, would Madam Chair and Ranking Member be okay with trying to maybe get them into the NDAA?
Well, thank you very much, Senator Braun. Senator Bozeman and I were just talking about there is such interest. There are a multitude of bills, all of which in some way come together. We also know this is very complicated, as we were just hearing about private ownership and how do we make sure this is focused and targeted in the right way on national security. I think we need to work together on all of this. Certainly NDAA is the vehicle that is moving and probably, will have the opportunity to be signed into law first. We don't know, but we certainly want to work with you, with other members of the committee and those off the committee to put together what makes sense. Some of this is jurisdiction of the Banking Committee with CFIUS, which I think is a very important piece of this.
And we've already worked with them to clear it, to make sure it dovetailed with them.
Absolutely. So I think we've got to work together. I pledge to work with you and with Senator Bozeman and other members that are interested to see how we can move forward in the way that protects our national security interests, but addresses the other concerns that have been raised today as well.
Senator Bozeman, you okay with that?
No, I agree totally. And again, as the chairwoman said, we were kind of going back and forth about a path forward. There's not many things in Congress where there's a lot of consensus, and I think that there is real consensus both in the House and the Senate, Democrats and Republicans, that we simply need to get this worked out, so that we protect, the farmland, protect our entities, our industry, but also, as Senator Fisher was talking about, not making this thing too onerous.
In that rare moment here in the U.S. Senate, we certainly ought to take advantage of it. Thank you.
Senator Thune, welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Senator Bozeman for having today's hearing on foreign ownership of U.S. agriculture. I also want to thank our witnesses for appearing before the committee and for your input on this important issue. It's already been stated, but food security is a critical component of national security, and we need to make sure that foreign countries do not hold an undue influence over our food supply. And I'm pleased that this year's Senate National Defense Authorization Act includes Senator Round's amendment to prohibit China, Iran, Russia, and North Korea from purchasing U.S. agricultural land and businesses, and I'll continue to advocate for this provision's inclusion in the final NDAA. And we also need to take a close look at the U.S. Department of Agriculture's role in overseeing foreign ownership of U.S. agriculture, particularly as we keep working on the next Farm Bill. We must safeguard U.S. farmland and food security is a critical component of national security, and I look forward to working with members of this committee on this issue in the next Farm Bill. Dr. Ortega, what are the food security implications of increased foreign ownership of U.S. agricultural land and businesses? And based on your research, what can we do to strengthen food security to support national security?
Great. Thanks, Senator, for the question. As I mentioned in my testimony, one area that I think is important to look at are the effects of foreign demand for agricultural land on land prices and rental rates. The research that is out there, and this has been done as part of the latest AFIDA reporting, shows that there's no effect of increased demand on foreign land values and rental rates. I will say, in terms of what needs to be done, and we've discussed a little bit of this today, we need to have better access to data. The AFIDA data that is out there and that is reported has a lot of missing records, missing values that make it very difficult to really understand what is happening. Another important point on this is when we look at trends in the AFIDA data, there's been a lot of reconciliation of past transactions due to a lot of these errors. So it's really difficult to track what's happening over time because of the data quality. And I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Mr. Pittman, you mentioned that USDA program eligibility for U.S. ag producers versus foreign persons is an area that can lack clarity. It's important that USDA programs are targeted to U.S. farmers and ranchers and not foreign persons. So could you explain that issue a little bit further, and how do we make sure that USDA programs are targeted specifically to help American ag producers?
So the short version of that is, in general, when it comes to USDA programs, particularly disaster assistance type programs, the word that's used is prorate. You prorate out the level of foreign ownership or the percentage of foreign ownership from the payment that's at issue. So that's how it's generally done now. An area that I can only speak to that I've noticed it. It seems to be a shift. I noted with the emergency relief program and then the recently announced milk loss program. It appears that the standard for those is any level of foreign ownership would create ineligibility. And so those are the two tracks that I'm aware of. And again, that kind of gets you down in from, we talked earlier about AFIDA, but parallel to that, when you have the statute, the regs, when you deal with Farm Service Agency or NRCS for that matter, you're going to have handbooks as well that go out to the states, and that's what's used at the county level to implement all these programs. And it's in the handbook where those new standards have been found, particularly for the ERP. And outside of that, it's more proactive. We're looking forward. You have several proposals. I won't relate them all here, but several that try to have some level of restriction on the receipt of federal funds. Some go as far as receipt of any federal funds. If a state doesn't have a law that prohibits foreign ownership to some degree, and others are more specific at the federal level to USDA programs. But it's a matter of changing those laws to the extent that that's done, through the committee and through Congress.
Thank you. Ms. Green, given your role in overseeing USDA's implementation of the Agriculture Foreign Investment Disclosure Act, what is your response to the discrepancies that Dr. Ortega has raised, and could you provide a status update on USDA's implementation of the improvements to the Agriculture Foreign Investment Disclosure Act that were enacted last year?
Thank you, sir, for that question. We're doing our best based on the information. It's a self-reporting document. We appreciate that Congress has put language in the appropriations language last year to update and to modernize AFIDA. It also came with zero funding. So we have done the recommendation, which was in the Consolidation Act, to be able to provide that in a queryable format. This summer, we uploaded Excel documents for the last 10 years of that data to be able to move forward. We have been hearing on some of those documents to be able to move forward. We're currently looking at budgets that are being discussed within the House and the Senate. We know that the FPAC Business Center, which houses the AFIDA, has a drastic reduction in their budgets, so that will have impacts as well moving forward. But we continue to find ways that we can move forward to be able to continue to work with.
And the discrepancies that he pointed out, I understand updating it as part of it, but you have any way of explaining that?
Yeah, so there's some items which we will call like stale records. So there's times that have compiled ways of where the where it has been recorded that it was sold or to foreign entities holding it, but that entity might have then sold it back to domestic, for example. So like a U.S. citizen might have it. Those kinds of informations need to be able to have that more updated format. The complicated system outside of USDA to be able to have an understanding how the deeds are recorded, when they're recorded at the county office level, the state level, or even the sovereign tribal communities, and how that reports up to us. There isn't like an automated query that we can then put it into the AFIDA way. So we have to rely on the self-reporting, and some that it includes the education and the outreach that we're doing with various entities, realtors, land trusts, local communities, posting it within our county offices so folks know to update their form and to make sure once it sells back from foreign to domestic or domestic to foreign to be reporting to FSA or to USDA.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Time's expired.
Thank you. It's Senator Hoeven.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To Secretary Montano Green, as has been brought up a number of times, a Chinese company recently wanted to purchase 320 acres and wanted to build a wet corn milling plant very close to the Grand Forks Air Force Base in our state. That raised serious national security concerns, defense concerns, because that base is a leading base when it comes to ISR, satellite, and actually now working with hypersonic development. And so we worked with CFIUS to try to address that situation, but because CFIUS really was not up to date in some respects in regard to agriculture, for example, and some other respects, the CFIUS process was not effective for that situation. We ended up working directly with Air Force and the City of Grand Forks and ultimately did resolve it. So that project did not go forward. As a result, we've taken a number of steps. And one of those is legislation. I'm a co-sponsor of the PASS Act with Senator Tester, Senator Rounds, and much of that legislation has now been included in the NDAA, in the Senate version of the NDAA, and we hope it becomes law, restricting China, Russia, Iran, North Korea from purchasing land, but also requiring the Ag Secretary to report on foreign takeover of U.S. businesses. So in this case, it wasn't just the purchase of farmland, it was an ag business that created the opportunity for spying, which was a big concern. So in terms of this legislation that we're now advancing to prevent this type of risk, not only foreign purchase of farmland, but spying on our military installations, that kind of thing, are we doing enough here? Is there something else that we should be doing in addition to what I just described?
Senator, thank you for that. Thank you for your various support in the agencies at FPAC. USDA does believe that agriculture is part of national security. And while FPAC and the 4 agencies that I get to work with in the nation area do not have direct purview over CFIUS, that would be with the Office of Homeland Security. It has been a discussion that I've been aware of various items. I think one is the consideration, right, that there is some ag land purchases that are not covered within CFIUS. So I think that's what you addressed within North Dakota specifically. It's also the placement and the ability for the Secretary to serve on CFIUS, of which he mentioned this week at a White House briefing that he is supportive of having USDA have a more robust role. Needs to be that plus more. The complex system to be able to have an understanding of the data that's occurring at the local level in 3,000 counties across this country, at the 50 states and 500 sovereign nations, to be able to report that up does not exist. So in addition to the work that we do to be able to have the Disclosure Act filed, having that complex system to be able to support and how we think about the federal interacting with local governments is really important to move forward. And the other item I would just like to raise is, as was discussed about the improvements for AFIDA or any items that we need to move forward, the resources to be able to complement that. While I still owe one of your colleagues a conversation, follow-up with the Office of Homeland Security about their respective budget needs, the implementation for us to be able to have the capacity to be able to implement this, if this moves forward, is going to be very important.
Okay, exactly. That's the other thing I was going to mention. I'm on the Ag Appropriations Committee. We included language last year, again, trying to address this issue, directing you to update the access system for AFIDA so that people can truly see what's going on with any of these foreign purchases of ag businesses. So again, where I'm going here, it's not just the purchase of ag farmland, and you're right, our state of North Dakota, we address that by prohibiting foreign purchase of farmland in our state. So there is a state role to play too, but in terms of the federal level, I'm really asking you about, are we getting a grip on these companies, these ag companies that are being purchased, as well as the farmland itself? And you're right, we did include that language in Ag Approps on AFIDA. We want you to update that. We've got a deadline for you of 2026. I understand you're saying you need more resources. I need to know about that, because if so, then we're going to address that as well. So again, hone in on the companies as well as the farmland and getting that system updated so we're tracking what's going on with these ag companies. And like I say, we'll continue to address that in Ag Approps as we did last year. But I need an update from you. What do you need? How are we doing? What do you need? I know you're going to say dollars, but... Well, you went 2 minutes over for Thune, so you're 32 seconds.
Welcome to. You're being asked what you need. I think you should tell them, because it's our job. It's our job to make sure you get what you need. It's really not fair to say do all this new stuff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, sir,
you have the lead.
I want to commend the leadership of this committee.
Sir, thank you. I'll take the last question, or the last part of your question first. Regarding the appropriations, thank you very much for including that in fiscal year 23 for the deadline, and the push to be able to modernize. We received zero funding to be able to implement that. So we did release this summer a very low-cost way to be able to have that queryable process available. We did Excel files for the last 10 years of data, which is loaded on our website to be able to process that.
Okay,
so,
you need to tell us what funding, we provided substantial funding. Whether you use it on that system or not, I get it, but you know what, that's a decision you have in your discretion. We need to know what you need to get it done. And Madam Chair, thanks for your indulgence. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. You have the invitation, so we look forward to the information. As we close, I just want to thank all of our witnesses. This is a very important topic. We're going to proceed. We understand it's also very complicated, and appreciate all the issues that have been raised today, but clearly great interest, and look forward to working with Senator Bozeman and the committee to address these issues. Thank you so much. Meeting is adjourned.